I've been doing Sega Lord X for a number of years now. I try and do videos bringing you interesting topics, games, and of course my opinion on them. I sat down to make this video with the best of intentions. This was to be Sega Master System movie games, a collection of software based on films that were released in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I found 27 titles that fit this criteria and knew a handful of them to be quite decent. I didn't have a lot of experience with many of them, so I figured it would be fun to discover these together. I sat down to start my capture, and good God was I smacked across the face with a wet bag of cold shit. The majority of these games were nearly unplayable. Mere minutes into well over half of them, and I genuinely wanted to punch myself in the face for thinking any of them were going to be any good. What I had meant to be a huge 30-minute plus episode of fun and discovery would no doubt be torture on myself, as well as you, trying to watch this trash. I just couldn't do it. 5 or 10 minutes is about all I could stomach with most of this group, and there was just no way I could pump 30 plus hours of capture time into such a terrible list of games. With that said, I wanted to cover this list, and I still think it's important to say a few words about these atrocities so you don't have to waste your time on them. I usually say at this point, I hope you enjoy the video, but honestly, this one is gonna be as painful as a rectal exam without medical jelly. I sincerely apologize in advance, so let's get started. In 1993, Arc Developments and Acclaim brought out the Addams Family for Powell Territories. This simple platformer doesn't play terrible, but has some of the worst hit detection I've ever seen. Everything damages you, even the damn platforms you're supposed to jump on. Stage layouts repeat often, and the music is ear-piercing. I played it for a bit, but did not enjoy it much at all. It's a shame, because the visuals are actually not bad. It was a huge red flag that the rest of these titles weren't gonna be much better. Back to the Future 2 is point blank one of the worst games I've ever played. No hyperbole. This shit stain of a title plays terrible, sounds bad, and has very simple visuals. It was developed by Images Limited and published by Image Works in 1991. Powell Territories received it, and I feel nothing but pity on the poor souls that paid money to own or rent it. Death comes swift and often, and you'll spend more time looking at the title screen and cinematics than playing it. Absolute trash start to finish. In 1992, the Powell version of Back to the Future 3 was released, developed by Probe Software and published again by ImageWorks. Shockingly, this is not nearly as bad as Part 2. The visuals and sound are so much better, and while it doesn't play particularly well itself, it's light years ahead of Part 2. It mirrors much of the stage layout and gameplay found in the Genesis version, and I believe it's better here top to bottom. Not exactly good, but also not the disaster of the previous release. I've covered Aladdin before, and it's a solid little game. Released in PAL areas as well as Korea, it was developed by Nexa and published by Sega. Solid graphics, unique stage design, and nice cinematics make up a game very much worth playing. The 4 megabit cart gives us some nice animation as well. It's not up to the standards of the 16-bit version, but it does the Master System proud. Probe was back again in 1992 with Alien 3. This is nearly a mirror image of the Genesis release with downgraded assets, but it follows the content to a T otherwise. Search for captured humans before the timer runs out. The 16-bit version kills it, but this plays well enough to hold your attention if you're a Master System junkie looking for something to play. And of course, like most of these games, Powell Territories were the only ones to see it. I recently covered The Little Mermaid in my Tech Toy episode because it was a Brazilian exclusive. It was released in 1996, and yes, it's a complete waste of space. Terrible graphics, poor performance, and gameplay that reminds you that not all Disney games on Sega consoles were worth playing. I know it's aimed at kids, but that's no excuse for this shit show. Developed by Aspect and published by Sega in 1993, I can't tell you the joy I felt playing this among the other garbage in this episode. Batman Returns is a great title with everything you need for a solid adventure. It even has different routes you can take for each stage. It suffers none of the gameplay issues that plagued the Genesis release. It can be tough and sometimes you don't know exactly where to go, but given the massive letdown of the 16-bit release, I'll play this anytime. Unfortunately, it only appeared on the Game Gear in the United States. I went into Bram Stoker's Dracula expecting the worst. Probe developed it and Sony ImageSoft released it in Europe in 1993. Shockingly, it wasn't awful. The visuals are decent and it plays okay. I can definitely see liking this enough as a kid to get some enjoyment out of it. It won't be on any top 10s, but its tried and true action platforming can be an afternoon's distraction. Sega's Dick Tracy is very similar to the Genesis release, both dropped in 1991. Despite similar design elements, the Master System version plays much worse. It's slower and the fewer buttons mean extra effort to do basic things. It doesn't look bad at all, but the gameplay just does not hold up well against a vastly superior version available at the same time. This actually saw a US release as well. I had not played much of the 8-bit version of Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and after 10 minutes, I really wish it had stayed that way. Released in 1994 by Acclaim, this is another joke on all of us. Pitiful gameplay just kills any chance this had at entertaining anyone. You are bombarded by the same few enemies every stage. Your arsenal includes a few different punches and kicks, but most are so useless, you'll just run around roundhousing everybody. It tries to be kung fu with bigger stages, but just ends up being another one that you can skip. How Acclaim lasted as long as they did crapping out rip-offs like this is beyond me. Again, it's a PAL exclusive. When Ghostbusters released in 1987, me and my buddy Rob played it to death. Developed by Compile and published by Sega, it was not your typical action release. Instead, you had access to numerous different items, had to strategize how to slow your enemy down, and deal with keeping your finances strong enough to survive to the end. Gameplay is split between an overworld map, driving segments, and controlling the Ghostbusters themselves. It's as much a strategy game as it is anything else. Learn how to play it, and this can actually be a really fun game. Well, at least until you start climbing those stairs. This was released first in the US, a rare thing for the platform. Probe was back again in 1993 with Home Alone. I honestly don't know what to say here. Pile of shit comes to mind, but that short changes just how bad this really is. You try and stop the crooks from stealing your home's valuables, but the awful gameplay makes the smallest things unbearable. 5 minutes of this will send you running to the fridge for a few cold ones to ease the pain. I was not a fan of the Genesis version either, but this turd makes that look like Game of the Year material in contrast. You poor PAL folks really got hammered with some truly bad games. I was immediately filled with dread upon starting up Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It was done by Tiertex and US Gold in 1990, and it's so incredibly unappealing. It's slow, the jumping mechanics are funky, and the time limit destroys any desire to play it long term. The visuals aren't bad, but there is no in-game music at all. After fighting with the pathetic control for 10 minutes, I was done. It's another shit game in this shitty roundup. Again, PAL regions were the only ones to get it. Before putting in the Jungle Book, I had seen some very positive reviews from European gaming magazines, so I had some high hopes. I don't know what they were playing though, because it certainly was not this crap experience. Ugly visuals, droning music, and gameplay that really gets old just minutes in. Enemies can hit you no matter where you are on the screen, and there are tons of blind drops that kill you out of the blue. In 1994, this was inexcusable, and anyone that gave this trash 8 or 9s in a review should be ashamed of themselves. No Japanese or North American release for this one either. In 1993, Sega internally developed Jurassic Park for the Master System. It's a radically different experience than what showed up on the Genesis. Here you get a combination of driving, shooting, and platforming segments that actually aren't too bad. The graphics are really quite good. I don't know, it's got its issues with repetition, but I did not hate it. I found myself wanting to see the next area. Like a lot of these, the Game Gear edition got a release in North America, but on the Master System, only Europe and Brazil received it. In 1994, Cyrox Developments did The Lion King, an 8-bit demake of the 16-bit versions released around the same time. Start out as Kid Simba and grow into Adult Simba to reclaim your throne. Lots of platforming, decent audio and visuals, and an overall enjoyable game. The same people that did this also did the Jungle Book, but I found this one infinitely more playable. It was never released in the US for this platform, and is definitely worth a look if you enjoy the IP or a challenging action title in general. In 1990, Arc System Works of Guilty Gear fame ported Sega's Moonwalker to the Master System. It was a surprisingly solid effort that played much like the 16-bit release. Your goal is to save children and stop the evil Mr. Big. Punch, kick, and dance your way across graveyards, caves, and parking garages in what is actually a pretty decent game. It was around this time I really began to understand there is a huge difference in quality between the Master System games that were produced while Sega was focused on it, and afterwards when the vast majority of software was third-party related. The platform's best years were definitely between 1985 and 1991. This one was also released in North America. 1993's Predator 2 was so close to being an enjoyable title, but of course Acclaim and its ilk found a way to screw it up. This run and gun plays well and has decent graphics, but the pacing is just tiresome. The stages are too long and the enemies just never let up with a constant barrage of the same patterns over and over. It looks and sounds different, but just isn't something you want to play more of after a few deaths. Not the worst game here, but this really could have been something more had the pacing been better designed. In 1986, Sega internally developed Rambo First Blood Part 2, an overhead run and gun that puts you in mind of stuff like Akari Warriors. It's a little slow, but otherwise is a great game. As Rambo, it was a US exclusive, but it was called Ashura in Japan and Secret Command in Europe. The quality of this is so much better than the majority of the games in this episode, and it was a delight to get a break with something I genuinely enjoyed. You should definitely check out each version of it for the little visual and sound differences between them all. This is strong enough to satisfy that curiosity. In 1988, Sega was back with Rambo 3, and this time, it stayed a Rambo game when it was released in the PAL regions and Korea. This is a Sega Light Phaser release that cannot be played with a control pad. Unfortunately, this means I can only show you the attract mode because my capture equipment is all tied to an LCD screen. Still, you at least get to see that it was a fairly nice looking game and one of the better phaser releases for the Master System. It also has an absolutely killer FM soundtrack. If you enjoyed stuff like Operation Wolf, this should hit the spot. Sega also made a Genesis game called Rambo 3, but it is completely different. Oh man, here we go back to the awful third-party garbage. In 1993, Acclaim tried once again to rob you of your hard-earned money with RoboCop 3. You get the kind of design in this one that makes you want to stop playing it immediately. Constantly there are enemies shooting you off the screen before you even have a chance to respond. Who finds this kind of crap fun? How is it fair to trigger AI that can see you long before you see them? And it's something that never lets up the entire way. To get anywhere, you literally have to scroll the screen an inch at a time to see the bullets first. This is the kind of shit that makes dumpster fires enjoyable. In 1987, the Stallion was back for his third outing on the Master System with Rocky, a boxing game that combined the first 4 films into one action-packed experience. Here you'll face Apollo, Mr. T, and the evil Russian Drago in increasingly difficult competition. Training sessions test your speed, and the graphics and sound are pretty nice. It's not the deepest rendition of the sport, but it also has a charm all its own you can't deny. It's even got its own Japanese release, a rare thing for this batch. It won't dethrone Punch-Out and Fun Factor, but this is still a nice trip down memory lane. US Gold and Tiertex were back in 1993 with Star Wars, a port of an NES game released in 1991. Surprisingly, it's not as bad as their usual stuff, though it's still not particularly strong. It's basic run-and-gun platforming with hilarious changes to the movie, like Jedi killing Jawas. Still, for Tiertex, this is like the best thing ever, and a nice reprieve from the toxic sewage they typically spread around. There's no US release for this one. Probe and Virgin were at it again with 1992's The Terminator. It's patterned after the Genesis version and has the same up and downs as that release. Nice graphics and decent gameplay are hurt by the exhausting repetition of respawning enemies. It's not a bad game at all, it's just that with a small tweak to the enemies' appearances, it could have been stellar. I mean, they just never let up. If Skynet had the ability to churn out robots at this pace, the future is in some serious trouble. I was not a fan of the Genesis version, and this here is orders of magnitude worse. Acclaim and Arc System Works helmed Terminator 2 Judgment Day in 1993, a side-scrolling action game that plays, looks, and sounds like an absolute nightmare. Why the hell am I having trouble killing humans with my fists? Why am I taking damage from humans with their fists? Why does it take half a dozen hits to drop these fools? Are they all coked up? Are they zombies from an alternate universe? The only thing I know is that games like this deserve not a second of your time. It's a shit show from the moment you hit the power button. Powell regions again were the only ones to suffer it. Not content with stealing your cash with just one Terminator 2 release, Acclaim and Probe were back to do it again with 1993's T2 the arcade game. This is a port of the arcade game that was released in 1991 by Midway, a side-scrolling gun game where you mow down endless waves of robots and other killer machines. The repetition here is unreal. It's the same thing for long stretches without any of the graphical thrills of the arcade original. It doesn't use the light phaser, and it's only one player. With the huge downgrade in presentation, this one is about as unappealing as you can get. Thank God it's our final game on this atrocious list of software. When I saw Tom and Jerry the movie here had been done by Sims and released by Sega in 1992, I thought this had to be decent. Wrong. This painfully slow experience is hampered by terrible controls and completely broken pacing. This is more a simulator-style obstacle course and not the action platformer I was expecting. It was again rated well by European gaming mags, making me now think that these guys were either paid off or suffering some form of brand evangelism that blinded them to the reality of the quality of many of these releases. A freaking 85 for this horse shit? Are you kidding? Sometimes you have to hang your head low for the state of some of these releases. I can't lie to you, I am so glad this episode is over. While I enjoyed a handful of these games, most were simply some of the worst experiences I've had in a very long time. Many of them had music and sound effects that had me wanting to reach for the power button immediately after cutting them on. You'll notice that many had the same developers and publishers releasing them, Acclaim and US Gold in particular. These companies seem to love to soak up the movie tie-ins for the easy cash grab, leaving customers with a pile of trash that was often not even close to being worth a full-price box of software. While Powell regions were the main target of these Master System releases, the US and Japan got many of them on the Game Gear, and they were just as terrible there. Because a lot of this drivel was multi-platform, there are much better versions to play elsewhere, even if those versions weren't great themselves. There are a few gems in here if you're interested, but outside of those, I can't recommend you even try most of these with your favorite emulator. They are truly that bad. I had absolutely zero nostalgia for the vast majority of these releases because I hadn't played them until much later. I'm actually really happy for that, because I'll never touch them again. You can still have some fun with the likes of Ghostbusters and Rambo, but most of the rest are better left alone. I'm Sega Lord X. I'm really sorry for this episode, and I will catch you next time.